Heyo! Alright, well, today's topic, teamwork. Because apparently, as we found out the last PvP Sunday, a lot of factions don't exactly have excellent teamwork. See, teamwork is extremely important because without it, you die. It's as simple as that. I don't care if you're just 2 people, if you're 3 people, I don't care if you're some 40-man faction, whatever. If you have bad teamwork or don't work together with your faction mates, it's just gonna spell the end for you. We've seen this multiple times on Battlegrounds. Tai, one of the larger factions, or major ones, that are an actual threat, and they've got the potential to be very, very effective, but they keep on shooting themselves in the foot, almost literally at this point. You have to experience it, you have to actually see it yourself to truly understand it. But almost every time they fight, I don't know what happened in their voice chats or whatever, but we have noticed that Strage, kind of, the faction leader or whatever, only has his Xbox Play set to private, so only very specific people can join if he invites them. And Goodheart, one of his more impressive pilots, we can say, has mentioned multiple times that even though he's available, that he needs support or so on, Tai is almost never there to actually give it to him. This is a perfect example of what happens when there's no teamwork. Your faction mates become frustrated. They have issues with your faction. They are unable to effectively combat because it's essentially they are 1v1ing, or I guess it's one of them against, as well, Tai finds themselves in a lot, against 4, 5, 6 ships, or sometimes even just 6 players on one ship or whatever. Almost every single time, though, of course, the fact that Tai doesn't ally with themselves with almost anyone does have a part in this. The fact that they don't effectively work with each other means that essentially they might have 6 ships on the field, but because of their lack of communication and teamwork, it's more like 6 separate ships that most of the time you can just pick off one by one because they're so uncoordinated. I don't know if it's because of a skill issue, I mean that with respect, or not in a rude way, or because they don't care about each other or what, but almost every single time we fought them, there's been some kind of weird shenanigans going on. Like I said, I'm not part of Tai, so I have no idea what's actually going on behind the scenes. For all I know, their faction could be melting from the inside out, or maybe they're always planning for something that doesn't happen. But it seems to be a reoccurring theme that Tai isn't there to support its faction members nor its allies. Storm, one of the higher-up players in IED, managed to get himself allied with Tai for a good while, and he's mentioned that even then, a lot of the time, Tai wasn't very coordinated or just didn't really speak to them about really anything. When they needed help, they'd ask for help sometimes, but if IED needed help, or maybe if something else is going on, Tai wasn't really there to give them the help they wanted. It's one of the reasons, I believe, that IED withdrew from that little alliance, though of course there's multiple other reasons, I bet. Like I said, I'm not Tai or IED, I'm IRS. So there could be something completely out of my control/knowledge in play here. But I think it's just very important that you are A, able to recognize you have an issue with communication, and B, that you have a way to fix that issue. How can you fix lack communication? Well, first of all, you gotta communicate. It's as simple as that, to be honest. You gotta communicate when you need help or what your plan is with your faction mates so they can help prepare for what you're about to pull off. Yeah, you can't prepare for every situation. In combat, all the time, IRS, IED, LDR, they pull out random tactics out of their butthole. And not everybody can go along with that. That's fine. But if you at least have a general game plan of what you're trying to do, you are much leaps and bounds ahead of most other players. Without communication, you fall apart. Simple as that. Now, why am I talking about communication? Why not ships or strategy or whatever? Well, it's as simple as communication keeps you alive, and communication allows you to use your grids up to their near maximum potential. Of course, a good pilot will always use a ship to its maximum potential, but a good pilot, most of the time at least, needs a team to support him, and it's hard for that team to support them if he's not saying anything, or if he's not mentioning, I need help, or this is what I'm going to try to do. Not just this, but being able to know what each of your faction's ship's roles or their weaknesses and strengths significantly helps. I don't know if this is true or not, but it seems that a lot of the time, TIE members don't exactly know what their ships are capable of. We see this a lot of the time with Strage's Cylon and Pestilence warships, where he's either too timid with them, or he's not timid enough with them, and kind of he uses them in ways that they are definitely not suited for. We see this with the Cylon going toe-to-toe against battleships like the Eviction Notice, Durflinger class, so on and so forth. The Cylon, as a whole, just because of its overall size and armament, is better, or at least most likely, suited for taking out lighter ships. If there aren't any lighter ships, it's a great artillery support ship because of its lance arrangement, which it uses a ripple fire engine that allows it to fire a stream of 640mm lances repeatedly. This gives it an advantage in terms of long-range lance support over almost any other ship on server, but because of how it's used, it doesn't really unlock its true potential because it's used in a manner that doesn't make sense or isn't effective. Anyway, back to communication. I have talked with multiple TIE members, only not, a major amount of them, because, well, it's not like TIE's the largest faction to exist, but they're reasonably large in size. And they themselves, or at least a couple of them, realize that they don't communicate all that well. Whether it be in combat or just out of combat. This is why we see, well, not just Strage, but just them as a whole get bodied so many times by the more setup / major factions like IED, LDR, DMI, as much as I hate those people on Kickstand, and IRS, because half the time they have a plan. Not all the time, of course. I am 100% guilty of not having a plan and letting almost nobody know what my plan is. And as such, I've been punished in ways that I was not happy with, with lots of damage on my grids most of the time. And I think once or twice in the complete destruction of some. But it proves that with communication comes survivability, and with survivability comes, if not more victories, then at least you can preserve your ships later on for those victories. Yeah, half the time TIE is heavily outgunned and outmanned, out-armed, out almost everything. There is no denying that. So there are fights they will simply not win. But if they had better communication, like in-combat communication, be honest, slightly heavier in terms of armor slash armament, weapons and armor and so on their grids, they could 100% be a major thorn at anybody's side. So far, unless your ship is completely immobile and has no AI active and is completely stationary, they're not gonna really hurt you, I'll be honest. I mean, yeah, it is, they still have guns, light guns, sometimes heavy guns, but they don't do anywhere near as much damage as they should. Now, let's talk grids, because technique is nice, strategy is nice, but grids are also a major important thing, because if your entire faction only uses small grids and you are fighting 120,000 PCU and 30,000 block warships, well, you might be a little more than screwed. Having, first of all, a well-diversified fleet is important, and second of all, having a fleet capable of doing most roles, or at least having a ship in that fleet capable of doing multiple roles. Since if your faction is more like TIE and you don't have a massive number of ships in a stockpile or arsenal, having ships that are capable of multitasking is very important. Having ships that are possibly interplanetary or good at support and brawling or long-range fire and repairs or whatever. Having multiple roles for each ship is important if you lack numbers, because it allows you to, even though you've got less overall players or less overall ships, it allows you to still go toe-to-toe, or at least have better utility than most of your enemies, unless they too are very similar to your own faction in design. Why do I hear railguns? You know, I am going to act like I never heard anything. Now, just because you are capable of printing a lot of large ships doesn't mean you should only have large ships. Why, you might ask? Because if you lose a large ship, it can take time to replace them, even if you have a hell of a lot of resources, and if you're rich and you can spend as much as you want and it won't matter. It still takes time, especially with lag and so on. And time sometimes isn't a luxury you get. Not just that, but it can also feed your egos or the enemy's egos, or they can will backfire spectacularly in terms of morale. If you lose, say we lost the eviction notice to something small like 40,000 PCU destroyer. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure you'd be pretty demoralized losing in a large battleship against some ship 20 times lighter than it. Not just that, but large ships most of the time have more than one flaw. And yeah, smaller ships also have flaws. You can have numbers, even if you don't have players, you can have a large number of those small ships in a single location with minimal lag, unless those have clang drives or gravity drives. That's something else entirely different, and I'm not going to get into that because it is a very weird subject that people apparently don't understand half the time. I mean, I know plenty of people who think grav drives cause zero lag, which is not true. And I know people who know that they are the bane of servers' existence, and all this and that. All in all, having a faction or a fleet capable of doing multiple things is important, because the ability to do multiple different things and not have to build an entire limits your faction to, say, a general short range, operational range. Having ships that have extremely long jump range or a ton of jump drives to jump other ships are important. If your ships have crappy jump range, having ships that have lots of containers to transport war materials or just ammunition or whatever to other bases or to other players as a whole is important. Having ships that are light and agile and others that are heavy and hard-hitting. Every single ship has its own role, and almost every role is necessary to a faction's survival, it says. What is this drone thinking he's gonna do to me? He's so lucky I turned shooting off in this zone because we've had so many incidents. Now, not every faction has a crap ton of players. This doesn't just apply to Battlegrounds, this applies to almost any server on Space Engineers, and even in games that aren't Space Engineers. Not every group of players or faction or whatever has 24 players active at all times or whatever. Or sometimes you don't even have more than 2 players on at once. As such, you need to prepare for stop shooting railguns at me, man. As such, you need to build your fleet around this premise. Or maybe you are a reasonably large faction, but those players in that faction dislike doing PvP. Which is, I'll be honest, a lot more common than you think it is. Weird as it sounds. I mean, first of all, you probably want to convince those other players to try and at least taste PvP out. Because there are definitely low points in it, but there are also a lot of high points. And it's an experience, to say at the very least. Even if it is a messed up, buggy abomination, whatever. If, say, you don't have that many players active all the time in your faction, or you don't have that many players just as a whole, you might want to go with more small and easy to build / repair ships, because you can't have someone who's dedicated to just repairing all your large grids, your really large grids. Or maybe you do, or maybe both of your players, or however many players in that small faction, are willing and capable of putting in the time and effort to repair each large ship after battle. What? I might. What? You. Ah, gotcha. Anyway. I was thinking of something. Oh, that's embarrassing. I can't remember what I was thinking of. Oh, I'm never getting that train of thought back. That's great. Alright, next subject. Say you are a smaller faction, because you are going to run into this a lot when you fight larger factions. You are heavily outnumbered. Say it's just you and your teammate, or maybe you and 2 teammates, against an alliance of 6 large warships. How are you going to win against that? Well, almost always, almost no matter what size of ship you're using, you can win, or at least cripple people to the point where it's essentially a win. All you have to do is have communication and be smart about how you play it. You want to stay at either longer ranges, or if your ship is suited for such, brawl. What I mean by if your ship is suited for such, if you've got an auto repair system, if you've got fast firing weapons with decent damage, like the 400mm gun, the 150mm gun, or the 300mm gun, especially the 300, I'll be honest, and are reasonably redundant or you're very comfortable in dodging heavy amounts of fire at closer range. Sorry about that. Just try through. Strategy, along with communication, like I've said before, is key to your survival, no matter how large your faction gets. Without communication, without teamwork, you die. Simple as that. If you have bad teamwork, you might as well call it quits. Just saying. How do you improve teamwork? Same as before, you gotta just get to know your faction. If you don't feel like doing that, well, at least try to communicate what you're trying to do. Communicate what your game plan is, and trade ideas with other players in said faction, or alliance, or whatever. Because, well, yeah, if I say that again, that's just kind of rehashing my point, but if you don't have good teamwork, you die. It's as simple as that. It's not that hard to understand, I don't think. It's almost anybody, PvP expert or not, can understand that. I mean, if you want examples, I've got plenty of clips on this channel that display what happens when your faction, or that doesn't have good teamwork, most of the time are enemies, excluding AD, or what happens when you're outnumbered in terms of guns and so on, and you don't have a plan, or what happens when you do have a plan, and yes, you've got a single advantage, or maybe two advantages, like weapon count or overall size, and you press that advantage really, really hard. Why am I using so much heavy armor for an armed transport? Jeez. Never let me build a transport ship again. Having or understanding your grids is almost as important as teamwork. If you can understand what your grid excels at and have good teamwork, well, I won't say you're unstoppable, because you can always be stopped by someone with more players that have experience or blah 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 blah, but you will be at least 5 times ahead of most other players, and it'll let you exploit your enemies seriously. I think we did some ouch! Did some decent progress on this weird looking cargo abomination thingy. Yeah. Yeah. If you want more like this, like, subscribe, notification bell, all that good stuff. Let me know what you want done next, and if I'm experienced or know anybody who's experienced in such a field, I'll make a video on it. Probably. Eventually. I think. Yeah. Owie. See ya.